back to Bandwagon fans. This is Jeff.
I'm Scott.
And tonight we are just a couple of old white dudes drinking Bud Light and talking about diversity in Marvel movies.
Can I say
Cheers.
not only drinking Bud Light, but seating it on a Guns N' Roses coaster?
Which is actually appropriate for one of the movies that we will be talking about tonight.
Is that right? Okay,
Yeah.
You lost me with that.
All right, so we are going to be we're going to be doing things a little bit different. We're going to be talking about Avengers Endgame and Captain Marvel. Scott has now seen 3 MCU movies. You are practically a fanboy now.
Practically.
So the Guns N' Roses reference was from Captain Marvel, where she was wearing a Guns N' Roses shirt.
9 Inch Nails.
In the flashbacks, when she was wearing Guns N' Roses shirt, and she had like the Guns N' Roses, the Axl Rose bandana. It was there, trust me.
Yeah, and a heart shirt, which I thought was more 80s than 90s, but
yeah. But music never goes away.
Right.
So we're going to be talking about Captain Marvel and Avengers Endgame, but we're not going to be talking about the typical the typical fan stuff. We're really going to be talking about a very conscious decision that Disney is doing to push diversity, representation, social justice values through their movies, and that's what we're going to be doing. So probably a strange choice for as far as who's going to be doing this discussion, but it's a topic that we're both highly interested in. So
further irony, I think.
Yeah. And it'll probably go quite a bit different than the last discussion I had about Captain Marvel. So, probably
how'd that go?
I'm kind of an embarrassment on my part. So, anyway, so last night we went and saw Captain Marvel. Took a group of people, and just about a week ago, we saw Avengers Endgame. Right. So first off, what kind of sticks out for you? From these movies in terms of some of the decisions Disney is doing?
Yeah, it's for somebody who's not entirely familiar with the franchise. I mean, I don't think you can live in the century that we live in and not have run into Spider-Man on a Slurpee cup or something at some point. But for somebody who's really not that familiar with the canon, so to speak, what I see when I'm watching the movies is that these filmmakers, and probably the executives at the studio, because stuff has to run through them, are making some very conscious decisions about what they want their audiences to take away. And my guess is that the reason that they're doing this is that they're planting the seeds for a really different kind of look to who maybe the superhero characters are going to be, and really doing some genre changing actions, and I think that these 2 movies, which feel to me that they're probably the kind of movies that you would call Hallmark movies. I mean, not Hallmark movies, but Hallmark in that they are...
Hallmark lowercase h.
Yes, lowercase h. Yeah. That they are defining the brand, so to speak, and they're doing that in an intentional way. And sending some real messaging about where I think Disney and Marvel intend to go, if I got that right.
Yeah, so. and I agree. So talking specifically about Captain Marvel for a moment, I watched quite a few video essays, reviews about Captain Marvel, and there's kind of a split. There's some people, quite a few people, I'd say the majority of the essayists would claim that Captain Marvel wasn't an overtly political or messaged movie.
Wow.
And
I wonder if they went to the same movie.
They could not be more wrong. Yeah. Captain Marvel, so the reason I put the group together to go see it last night was specifically to talk about how feminism is represented in the movie. Right. And almost every frame in that movie is shot, and directed from a feminist perspective, and unapologetically. Right. And then Endgame has some moments where they clearly put a lampshade on representation and diversity and said, you have to see this. You can't miss what we're doing. We're doing this very much on purpose. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right that these are very intentional decisions. It's it's Disney's way of announcing where Disney and the Marvel universe are going in the future.
Right.
And one of the topics, so one of the topics that has come up is it patronizing?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we're going to run through a couple of the highlights. Let's run through a couple of highlights, particularly in Endgame. You had the first gay character actually portrayed in a movie, not hinted at or referenced at. And I believe, I think it was Joe Russo who actually played the character. He's one of the directors. Mm-hmm. It might have been Anthony Russo. I get the brothers mixed up.
I would not have known that either of those characters were anybody important other than as actors.
Yeah, it was one of the directors. Okay. I'm probably messing up which one it was, and it was an intentional choice to cast himself in that role. So you had that. You had, and this is a word that probably wouldn't mean anything to you, A-Force. So at the end of Endgame, there was a scene where all the women were lined up together or charging into battle, and it's being called the A-Force moment, which is a reference to a particular team in comics.
Right.
And then towards the end of the movie, you have Thor turning over the kingdom of Asgard to a black female.
Right.
Captain America turning over the shield to a black male.
Right.
And I'm sure there's some other highlights that I'm missing.
Well, something to think about. We could kind of take each of those. The decision to include an openly gay character. Like, oh my God, it took you this long?
Yeah.
Really? I mean, people. I mean, it's astounding to me. I didn't know that was I learned that was the first time that somebody actually, and it's kind of a throwaway, but I think what their messaging is, it's like, okay, yes, we're, this is part of our universe and it's going to be here. So, buckle your seatbelt, I guess.
Right.
And know that we're going to be including characters and people like this. I think they tried to do it in a pretty naturalistic way, but it is obvious. It is. I think you call it hanging a lampshade on it. They kind of hung a lampshade on it, because it's not something that was crucial to the plot.
No, not at all.
It's a sideline.
It was a good moment of character development for Captain America, and it was a callback. The whole scene was a callback to a scene in The Winter Soldier.
Okay.
But having the gay character was not crucial to the plot.
Okay.
But it's the kind of thing that you would see in normal everyday life.
Right. Yeah.
Gays are there.
Right.
Not going anywhere. Even if you snap half of the population away.
Right.
Half of the gays are still there.
Right.
So you would. I've seen some backlash against that scene from the gay community. Okay. I don't know how extensive the backlash is, but it could be one dude who was pissed off.
Yeah.
And basically saying that it's not enough.
Right. It's not actually.
Right.
But we were having a conversation. We were on a walk, taking a walk before we sat down to do this, and talking about like how really difficult it is to send a message that even when your heart is good, because you're going to take some flack for it. Right. You're going to take some flack that you did it too early, you did it too late, you did it too hard, you didn't do it hard enough, all of those things. And, I could understand why maybe a gay person might look at that and think, it's like, okay, guys, about time. And it's not like it's a superhero. I mean, it's just somebody who's in a conversation in a therapy group, right? So I can understand all of those issues with it, and by the same token, it's like glad that we've at least opened the door, and let's open it a lot wider.
Right, and it's kind of a tough position for the filmmaker and the studio,
right?
Because they should be recognized for being the first to do this, and they're also going to be bashed for not doing enough.
Right.
There should be a fully gay superhero with a cape kissing another superhero.
Yeah.
And having, and there's a lot of speculation that that's where Captain Marvel is going. That she's actually in and even then it's going to get backlash. Oh, why has it got to be two hot women and not two dudes, that's still, and I, to defend the studio, I think it's more of a statement. We're going to talk about this more when we talk about the A4 scene, but I think it's more of it's more of a criticism of the culture surrounding the studio. And you have a studio just trying to do something good within this culture,
right?
But the culture is so skewed against gay representation,
right?
That any gay representation becomes representative of all representation.
What do you mean by the culture? Because I think that, I think we've gotten over it in films in general. Like in films in general, it's not a problem to have gay characters. Are you talking about the Marvel universe or the comic universe?
So there's wide segments of the population where it's still not acceptable.
Okay.
It is still not acceptable for professional athletes to be openly gay.
That I understand that's changing, but yes. Okay.
I don't follow sports as much as I did a couple years ago, but I'm not aware of any openly gay active player in any of the major sports. It's still just not accepted, even though we know it's there. It's not out.
I'm just thinking Hollywood in general and the movie industry in general, as not. I mean that the movie industry, it tends to follow the lead instead of leading, even though sometimes it feels like it's leading. It tends to follow the lead, but I don't think in general it's a surprise to see. I'm not talking about this movie, but to see movies about gay themes with gay people, or even movies that just have gay characters,
right? But
including
you
gay
also,
leads.
You're also kind of a self-selective audience that you don't go to most of the mainstream popcorn blockbuster movies.
That's true.
So, for example, when the live-action remake of Beauty and the Beast came out, everybody announced that LeFou was going to be gay, but there was nothing in the movie itself. There was nothing in the text to say that he was overtly gay.
Okay.
So there's still a lot of it. It's within analysis, it's called queer baiting, where the studio or the director or the actor says, "Oh yeah, the character's totally gay," but the movie doesn't actually portray the character as.
It's
gay.
like it's supposed to be an Easter egg that you're sort of supposed to discover, and a little sort of behind the scenes that you can kind of laugh about with your friend. It's like, oh, he's totally gay.
Yeah.
Without actually saying that maybe this character is a gay person that leads a normal life. Yeah. Right?
So whereas with Love, Simon, that's a gay character portrayed as leading a gay life, right? With all the problems of that. So it's but LeFou is just, you're supposed to imply that he's gay, even though they don't actually show him as being gay.
Right.
And I think that's more indicative, that queer baiting is more indicative of how gays are portrayed than overtly gay characters. It's still somewhat abnormal for it to be out, out in the open.
If we look at some of the other instances, you move from, there's no way to look at a person and tell if they're gay. Right. And really no way to listen to a person and tell if they're gay. I mean, there are a lot of tropes. But, but moving on to some of the other instances, right? I mean, these are like people of color or women.
Right.
So you couldn't sort of say, oh, maybe Brie Larson is a woman. But clearly Brie Larson is a woman.
Yes.
Right. So we get that. So there are some of the instances that you talked about, very straightforward, putting these characters like right in the front and saying that I think saying we're going to build the franchise on a cast of characters that looks a lot different than it has.
Right.
Yeah.
So you want to jump ahead to the A4 scene?
Yeah, yes. Sure.
So we were talking about this earlier as we were walking around, and I do wish we had recorded that conversation because it
was good.
Yeah. So the A4 scene is where, and I can't even list all the names, but you had all these female characters, led by Captain Marvel, and then all the other women showed up and said, she's not alone, basically, and then they all charge into battle.
Right.
Again, it is absolutely fair to say that scene was contrived and patronizing, but I personally would defend it because it was contrived and patronizing. It was a very intentional decision.
Yeah, we were like, my reaction to that scene, which is like famous and infamous already. I think the next day after I saw the movie in the Washington Post, I saw an article about that scene in particular. And, my sense of it was that it skirted right up to this sort of line of tokenism. And it might have even possibly sort of stepped over that line. But I think it needed to happen.
Yeah.
Like, they needed to do that. They needed a scene with a white guy, or the guys get their ass kicked, and the women are shown to be as strong, as intelligent, to have all the power that they need to step in and handle a situation without them hanging on the arm of some guy, which is, I think, how we've tended to think of them in the past. And the studio sending a message, a clear message.
Yeah.
This scene didn't have to be in there. It doesn't necessarily move the story forward. It probably does in some small ways. But it was the, iconic flag going up on Iwo Jima. I mean, they're standing next to each other. It just shot from low. It just looks powerful. And Marvel, I think, is vesting power in these people.
So, and when we were talking about the gay representation, I was talking about how this movie, these scenes look weird, but that's because of the larger culture that they're in. Before the A4 scene, there's the scene of the three, Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, all shot from behind approaching Thanos.
Right.
And at no point does anybody say, well, why do they have three white guys together? Right. It's because three white guys doing a hero deed is normal to us.
It's like what we expect, right? Yeah.
Well, you can't normalize behavior until you start showing it. So for the people that are critical of the A4 scene because they think it's patronizing, I get where you're coming from.
Right.
But you're also setting up a scenario where it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Right.
Seeing especially in movies where there's magic and superpowers, I don't want to hear about men being genetically superior to women or being genetically stronger. Magic, fuck off.
Right.
There are no biological rules in this universe.
Right.
So there's no reason why there shouldn't be as many women blasting fire out of their hands as there are men.
I actually, this is slightly off topic, but after having seen, I know we'll talk about Captain Marvel, I'm kind of wondering why Captain Marvel didn't just come in Endgame and just kill everybody right away, because I think clearly she could if she wanted to. I kind of felt like maybe she was holding back a little bit.
Right. So on that note, one of the concerns narratively with her coming out of the Captain Marvel movie, and it's a very similar concern to, say, Superman in the DC universe.
Right.
When you have,
they're almost omnipotent.
Yeah.
Right. And
when you have an omnipotent character, you have to get really creative about writing them out of the story. Otherwise, they just
solve everything.
Yeah. So within Endgame, that's what they did. They literally wrote her out. She's like, "Hey, peace out. I'm going to go help some other people.
I'll be busy, but you guys are good, and I'll check back."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but again, going back to this issue of gender representation, when you see when you see Superman written that way, you don't question that it's being written that way. You don't question the logic of it being a male.
Mm-hmm.
You question the narrative structure and the character development of somebody who's near omnipotent, and
mm-hmm.
but you don't. But it doesn't seem abnormal. You don't say, well, why is a dude that powerful? Whereas Captain Marvel gets a whole ton of backlash. I've heard one of the biggest things that I've heard in watching this is people say that, well, she didn't earn her place in this universe. Oh, I don't even know what that means. Like, who earned their,
Yeah, it's a story, right? It's a myth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even understand.
Do they
that
feel like
maybe
are they almost putting that on Brie Larson or something
on
like
Brie
that?
They're putting it on the character itself.
Yeah,
like the character.
The character is has a life. Exists somehow.
Yeah. Like I don't understand logic, but it's one of the things probably from at least half a dozen different videos and stuff. I've heard somebody say that. But anyways, yeah. So yeah, she could have come down, and she did. She was basically a flying, fire breathing.
Right.
What's the term? Doa Machina. What? Oh, I'm blanking on the term.
I have no idea where you're going.
In theater, the ending where something just comes down like the machine from God and solves everything.
Right. Yeah, the ghost in the machine.
Yeah. I'm butchering the pronunciation. Doa Machina. The machine of the gods. And in theater, it was literally a machine built into the stage where God would come down and right all the wrongs, and then happy ending, everybody goes away. But anyways, enough of that little minutia. So we were talking about A-Force. We got kind of diverted with some other stuff.
Right.
But the big takeaway for me is these things shouldn't look abnormal. Right. Especially in this universe. It should be totally normal that some women are doing this. And the only way to get it to be normal is to actually show it.
Right.
And so while I understand some of the backlash against the way it was done, I applaud them for the decisions.
I was thinking about on the drive over here to sit down and talk about this. I was thinking about Jackie Robinson. And I do not put Brie Larson on the same level in any way as Jackie Robinson. But I was just thinking about sort of messaging and Jackie Robinson being a black baseball player when there were no black baseball players. Now, I don't follow baseball.
Right.
But if I happen to be flipping through the channels and I see a baseball game on and I see a black baseball player, it's not a surprise to me. There are a lot of black people that play professional baseball. And it could be that in 20 years, the sons and daughters of people who are having a problem with Brie Larson or with some of these other characters of other races or who look different, that their kids will flip through the hologram channel or whatever they're watching at that time and see them, and it truly will be no big deal. Like, it won't, as you're saying, it won't make a bit of difference because it will be what they grew up with and know. So the idea of, and it's not like Marvel started this, but every generation has to pick up the torch and run with it or decide to lay it down. And I think Marvel's picking up the torch and saying, we're going to run with it. And hopefully that does mean in 10 or 20 years it's going to look like a different world to people watching the movies. And make all the money in the world. Yeah. I mean, we talked about that too. I mean, here's an interesting thing, right? So Brie Larson, kind of cute, right? You could say so. She is not any number of things that she's not overweight. And I think if you shot an engine on a rocket and it gave you superpowers, I don't really know that it would ultimately matter how physically fit you were at the time that you shot the rocket. Right. She is attractive by very conventional standards, attractive by extremely conventional standards. She is still white.
And blonde.
What a surprise. Yeah, and her hair is quite perfect. And as my wife Anna pointed out, in the fighter jet, I don't think she always would have had her hair just the way that she had it if she was actually flying a mission. So she's still glamorized. Right. And she's still, kind of the girl next door that can kick planets' asses. So it's a step, but it's also not, she's not representational of what most people, she's not representational of what most women in America look like.
But So now we're gonna swap over to the actual Captain Marvel, the movie.
Oh, sorry, I did that without thinking.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I got ahead of myself.
That's fine. So we're gonna talk a little bit about Captain Marvel, the movie, and one of the things that I loved about that movie. Yes, Brie Larson is an incredibly attractive woman who doesn't represent what most women look like. Mm-hmm. However, Chris Hemsworth does not represent what most men look like. Mm-hmm. Chris Evans, who's Captain America, does not look like most men, and
right.
neither does Robert Downey Jr.
Right.
So I don't. It's again, we were talking about this earlier, the difference between observation and criticism.
Right.
And usually people, when they hear an observation, they assume it's a criticism.
Right.
And a lot of times people that should be making observations think they're criticizing something when they are just making an observation.
Or artists feel like they're being criticized sometimes when somebody's just pointing out something in their work that they might not have even realized was there.
So everything in Hollywood, not everything, but almost all lead actors are glamorized.
Right.
They're aspirational.
Right.
The difference between Captain Marvel.
Annette Bening is gorgeous.
Just on a total side note, Annette Bening annoys the crap out of me.
Does she really?
Yeah. There's just some, and it's been in almost every movie I've seen her. Going back to American Beauty and The Siege. I think it was The Siege. There's just something about her that just annoys me. But she is good at what she does. It just rubs me the wrong way.
But I mean, she's an idealized senior person.
Yes.
I mean, it's. Well, the observation is that yes, Marvel is still going after people that mortals like us aspire to look like, and aspire to act like, and aspire to have those bodies, and most of us don't.
But what I was going to say with Captain Marvel is, it's still aspirational, but it was shot in a way, and she was portrayed in a way that rejects the male gaze.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for those of you who, if you're still watching at this point, you probably will know what the male gaze is. But for those of you that don't, the male gaze is a way of shooting film. It's actually a critique of film, saying that all film is shot this way, where it's shot from the perspective of men and what men's desires are. So that, and when I'm saying men, like the male audience, so that the people in the film itself, males are portrayed as aspirational. It's what we want to be. And women are portrayed as objects of desire.
Right.
What we want to be like Captain America, we want to achieve Captain Marvel.
Right.
What Captain Marvel did was flip that. And she was not portrayed as, even though she's still glamorized, she's still beautiful, just like Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth is, she was portrayed as aspirational of what we want to be, not necessarily an object to acquire.
Right.
And actually the males in the film, actually I won't even say it was a complete subversion, but she was definitely portrayed as an aspirational role model, not just no lingering ass shots,
right?
No subjective leers, no gratuitous bending over to pick up something that she had dropped.
Right.
She was shot frame for frame the way a male in that position would have been shot.
Yeah, and the characters treat the other characters the male characters treat the female characters in this with respect.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't
doing the dishes with them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That pissed off so many dudes.
Did it really?
Oh, yeah. Just as ridiculous.
I love doing the dishes, by the way. So.
I personally hate doing dishes, but I have to do the dishes, or I will not have clean dishes.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, a lot of people were pissed off that Nick Fury was washing dishes, relegated to kitchen duty.
Right.
Actually, there's an observation I had. I was just watching The Post, I think yesterday, and there is a scene in The Post. Yes, very good movie. There is a scene in The Post where there's like a dinner party with and I don't know any of the characters. I just know Meryl Streep was the actress in this scene. Mm-hmm. But there's a dinner party with her, 2 other women, 3 guys, and the 3 guys start talking about some banking regulation. And the women all look at each other and they say, "This is our cue to leave." Mm-hmm. And they leave and they go do women talk while the men talk business and money.
Which clearly women wouldn't understand.
Right.
Right.
There's a scene in Captain Marvel where they subvert that. Where Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, is getting ready to have a talk with Maria Rambeau. The Maria Rambeau's daughter, Monica, goes off camera to do something. And Carol Danvers looks at Nick Fury and says, "Shouldn't you go with her?"
Right.
Sends him with the girl
him away.
so that she can go have her heart-to-heart talk.
Right.
those are the moments, and they're really subtle. If you're not clued into to this type of film analysis, you could totally miss it.
Right.
But every scene in that movie has something like that, where typically it would have where the genders were swapped in the way it was shot and staged, but not necessarily the actual genders were. And it's why I love movies. It's why I've seen Captain Marvel 6 times, because every time I watch this movie, I catch another scene like that I had missed earlier.
Now there is another important message that Disney is putting out in this movie, and it is that the people that we're afraid of, the people who look different than we are, and actually sometimes the people who look different than we are but are forced to look like us in order to have some agency, may or may not be the villains. Right. And that's a really interesting. I went expecting to see I expected to see a political movie. It was a political movie. I don't care what anybody says. Yeah. Political movie. I was expecting that it was going to be all about messaging for feminism. And, I know we've talked about fourth wave feminism, so you could argue that it sort of folds back into, people who are poor, people who are refugees, people who are disenfranchised. But there's a really interesting ongoing theme that sort of flips this whole story on its head at one point, when it turns out the people that you have really been taught to despise as the audience are the refugees and are actually the ones who are struggling for their own survival, and they're not really bad guys.
Yeah, so you're talking about the Skrull,
yes,
who are, and at the beginning of the movie, they're described as terrorists.
Right.
And then we find that, from their perspective, they're refugees.
Right.
And you couldn't be more on point with some of the dialogue that's going on in our culture right now.
Right.
The difference between the terrorist and a refugee, the difference between a refugee and a gangbanger.
Right.
The threat of the other. And there's actually a line in Captain Marvel, and I can't remember the exact line, but it dovetails really nicely into socialist ideology, where they're basically saying that the problem is the hierarchical structure and not so much these vertical divisions.
Mm-hmm.
Where they're rejecting they reject the vertical divisions. I'm butchering the point I'm actually trying to make. But basically they shift the attention from being against the other to being against the classes.
Right.
Which, not expecting to see that in a Disney movie.
And let's say it's fascinating, and a fascinating choice, that the Skrull, is that what they're called?
Yeah.
Skrulls?
Yeah.
Skrulls. That they look like a green devil. I mean, they straight up look like they don't have horns, but other than that, they could easily be represented as, if you just made their skin red, that would be like what little kids were taught that this idea of Satan looks like. So they start right off the bat looking wrong.
Right.
Because they kind of look scary.
Yeah.
And they kind of look gross.
They look like Alex Jones's lizard people.
Yeah, they were like lizard people. Yeah. And then the fact that, and it's like, I'm not much of a science fiction fan, but a friend got me to watch maybe the first season of Battlestar Galactica, where you have, these ideas of these like creatures that can look just like you, right? And that's a problem because you don't know who they are, because they're infiltrating. They're these cells that are infiltrating. And how it really turns out to be the bad guys who you think at the beginning of the movie are the good guys, how they're treating these people for what seems to be no real reason. And I think that this again is not an accident on the part of Disney. It's not an accident on the part of Marvel. It's a straight up message that they are giving us to say that this is going to be the ethos going forward, I think.
Right. So just some quick background for more for you and for a couple for. So in the comics, the Skrulls go all the way back to like the earliest issues of Fantastic Four.
Okay.
So we're talking, I think 1961. They were one of the original villains of the Marvel universe.
Okay.
So and and if you think like early 60s, what aliens looked like, they just looked it's the green skin.
Yeah, they're definitely men from Mars.
Yeah, that's basically what they were, right. And they were really really goofy characters. And some of that goofiness was carried over in this movie. So they're definitely a product of their time, of the early '60s, and also it's such a iconic depiction of aliens. Whether you're talking about V, or just countless number of lizard people. Right. It's kind of like the stock Martian. Right. It's kind of the stock Martian. So, anyways, just a little bit of And the whole shape-shifting thing, Skrulls have always been portrayed in the comics as like the big scourge and like the big threat. So this being the twist where they were actually just people just trying to find a home,
right, was
like a really huge shift. Even diehard comic fans probably would not have seen that coming.
So
they would have been more surprised
than I was.
Yeah, it was a pretty bold choice to do that.
But even for somebody who's not steeped in the universe, that all played.
Right.
Like I didn't get that they were characters that have been around for a long time, but I got like that. It was pretty easy to play them off as being sort of the enemy.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately important to the plot, that it turns out that maybe they're not. So,
yeah.
Or they're not.
So you had said something about having to change their appearance to get any kind of social capital, and I hadn't thought of that particular perspective before. I thought that was kind of interesting.
I mean, isn't that? I mean, particularly in a post 9/11 world, like a lot of you're talking about the Skrulls.
Yeah,
again.
the Skrulls. Yeah.
Like a lot of the fear is it's shifted from people who live over there. Like, the whole Star Wars thing with Reagan was, well, we just have to defend ourselves from things that might go up into space and fall on us. To, post 9/11, we're afraid of people who live next door to us.
Yeah.
And part of the issue with those people who live next door to us is they look a lot like we do. Or at the very least, even if they don't look a lot exactly like we do, they look like a lot of people. And so how do you separate, who's a terrorist and who's not a terrorist? And I think that is a deep fear that modern people have.
Not just modern people. So, the history of society, one of the central issues in any society, and one of the biggest issues any culture has to deal with, is how do you approach strangers?
Right.
You and I know each other. I kind of know what your intentions are. When I see you, I have no assumption that you're going to rob me or kill me.
Right.
Whereas if I had never met you before and I just see you with the crazy hair and the beard, maybe I would think that.
Right.
But because you're a stranger.
Right.
So it is interesting that when they look strange, they're a threat. So they have to kind of blend in.
Right.
But there's also like more like throughout the movie that comes up several times in really subtle ways. So there's a scene towards the end. It's kind of like the wrap up scene, and they mention Ben Mendelsohn mentions the color of his eyes. And the little girl Maria Rambeau says, "Don't change your eyes. I love your eyes."
Right.
And that that kind of if you're familiar with Asian culture at all, there's a big move in Asian countries to actually have surgery to change their eyes to look more Western.
I've heard about that.
Yeah, and it's horrible.
Yeah.
It's kind of this idea that there's a particular standard, which is an Americanized Western standard,
right,
and everything else is being measured up to that. And if you don't measure up to that, and Foucault would love this conversation, somebody invents the standard, and then you're evaluated against that standard, and then you have to change to meet that standard.
Right.
And that standard is such a crock of shit to begin with, but it fits the people who already the people who already fit that standard, right? Americans, particularly white Americans, are totally cool with that being the standard because we already achieved it.
Right.
Just, and there were other moments. There was a moment, and I mentioned this when we were at dinner the other night. There was a moment where the four of them are on the ship going up into space. So you have the Talos, the Skrull General, Maria Rambeau, Carol Danvers, and Nick Fury. And Nick Fury and this was two interesting choices here. Nick Fury and Maria Rambeau were pestering Talos with, well, can you do this? Can you do this?
Right.
I'll give you $50 if you do this. Which is totally how immigrants feel. Like they're on stage.
Right.
Like if you're an Asian girl, and I'm thinking of a specific example from my life where there's this Asian bartender, and this white couple was trying to compliment her, but complimenting on how exotic she looked.
Right.
And she's like, I'm sure she's thinking, I just want to serve your beer.
Right.
I'm not on display for you.
I'm not here to look a certain way for you.
Yeah.
Right.
And Ben Mendelsohn has this exacerbated side of just like, you guys are fucking retarded.
Right.
And it was interesting to have that shown, and it was really interesting to have the two black characters
kind of peppering him.
Kind of show that it's a universal trait to treat the other as the other.
Right.
So just an interesting.
And they are they are fascinated by him.
Yeah.
And they kind of want to see him turn into a toaster. I mean, they really kind of want to see that happen. And he just, like you said, he does like.
Yeah.
And then the movie moves on. And to his credit, he doesn't turn himself into a toaster.
Yeah. and again, if you're not paying attention, it looks like it's just some funny banter between people on a spaceship.
Right.
But there was multiple layers in the writing going on there.
Yeah.
Going back to this whole thing we're talking about with leaning into the messaging that they're doing.
Right.
Yeah, so just a ton of moments like that in Captain Marvel that I really appreciated. Is there any aspect of this messaging where you think the backlash could be justified?
I have thought about it a little bit in the last seeing 2 Marvel movies in a week, not having seen anything before. Where what I hope happens is, and whether or not I see another Marvel movie, I don't know. I actually kind of like these, so I probably will. So.
I'm pretty sure Anna wants to go see Spider-Man.
Yeah, so I may go see Spider-Man. And Black Panther, people keep telling me I should see Black Panther, so I might go
fascinating.
Yeah.
I'll let you borrow it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Right out of the library.
Oh, oops.
So here's a concern that I have, and it's again, I mean, applause to Marvel for doing this, and it's so nice to see that that people in power are actually, people who are making creative decisions are making creative decisions to include important people and people of different color and all the things that we've talked about. People who just look different, who are different, and portraying them as powerful people. So good for that. They also do need to keep telling good stories.
Right.
And if they get drunk with the idea of this social justice upfront message being the thing and lose sight of the story, it will become less interesting because, like you said, I think what they need to do is they need to weave this into the normalcy of what they're doing. So maybe future movies, it won't be every single scene, but future movies, it won't have to be. Like, that would be the hope. Like, it actually doesn't have to be that every piece of it has, like, this deep sort of social meaning. It will be a story because the stories that came before set the groundwork that said, we're going to do this in a different way. And so what I hope they don't feel constrained in their stories. And I hope they can still, I want them to be able to tell stories about misogynistic characters, right?
Right.
I don't want the misogynistic characters to be heroes, but I also want to recognize the fact that, it's like you said, there were 3 white guys standing there. There's probably some misogyny in 3 white guys. Now, you don't see it in the superheroes, right? But you see it in real life.
Right.
And so hopefully, like, they'll be able to, like, embrace that in their stories, that this is real, it's the real world, it's the way things really happen, and present things in a way, oddly enough, in superhero movies in a naturalistic sort of way. So that's what I hope for them.
Yeah, and I agree. I particularly at the end of Endgame, where the Captain America shield was handed off to a black guy.
I almost cried. I don't even know anything about these movies, and I was literally like in tears because of the messaging in that. To me, that was the most significant piece of messaging in either of the 2 movies, was that, and I don't know anything about these characters, so. Yeah,
it was the first time I saw Endgame, by the time that scene came along, I had been choked up for like an hour or so.
Right.
But yeah, it was one of the most significant moments.
Captain America is a person of color.
Right.
And
who probably has a pretty nice ass himself.
I'll take your word for that.
I'm sure Anthony Mackie's ass will represent America
featured well. So
yeah.
All right. So to me, that was that felt like a very important, that felt like an important moment in film. It really did felt just like something that people may look back to, and I think they'll look back to some other things. I think what they call them, the A-Team, the A-Force. The A-Force. Yeah. I think people are going to look back to the A-Force. I think that shield being handed to a black dude, I think that there are a lot of people, and I'm thinking that, it's, oh my God, there are like black families that can take their kids to this and go, that's Captain America.
Yeah.
And I would think if it was me, I can't be inside their head to know how they feel, but I would think if that was me, that would be important.
But we can be inside their head, though. The difference is we've had that experience our whole lives.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
We've
always been Captain America.
Yeah, we grew up with Han Solo and Harry and Indiana Jones and Dutch or the Predator, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Rocky and so many movies. The entire media has been catered to us experiencing that.
Sure.
The difference is now people are starting to say there's more than white dudes out there.
Right.
So.
Which doesn't make me feel any less.
No, not at all.
And that's the thing that is, like, that's what's amazing about it, is that you can actually say, like, I want this to represent something that looks more like, if not the world, let's just start small, that looks more like America.
Yeah. And we're going to wrap this up here in a second, but that's probably the most important point that any of this could be made. Coming from 2 white dudes drinking Bud Light.
On Guns N' Roses coasters.
Yeah, on Guns N' Roses coasters. There's absolutely no reason to feel threatened by a black woman becoming the queen of a fictional North mythology kingdom.
Right.
There's cool. I'm great.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
I like the world better that way.
Yeah. There's no reason nothing's being taken away from me because they showed a gay guy on screen.
Right.
Nothing will be taken away from me if they show a gay guy wearing a cape kissing another gay guy.
Right.
It's not gonna. It makes my world better.
Right.
Seeing that stuff.
Right. And I actually feel like I'm starting to get choked up, but I really feel for the kids who are going to see this. It's like I said, the superhero genre, it's not my genre, but there are other genres that are my genre, and this needs to happen everywhere.
Right.
And I'm thinking of, a 6-year-old girl. And maybe there may be some things in this movie these movies that might not be great for a 6-year-old, but, let's say maybe a 13-year-old girl. That can go to see this, or a 16-year-old, some person of color, of some color, or I mean, let's talk about ultimately, like, people who are disabled, people who are different, all of those things. I want them to widen the canon,
right,
and keep doing this until it looks like what it looks like when I walk on the street.
So one thing you probably don't catch because they don't say it overtly. The one character, War Machine, Don Cheadle, is disabled.
Okay, no, I didn't know.
So in the movie Captain America: Civil War, he's in his suit flying around, gets shot down. So he's actually a paraplegic.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So they don't bring it up because we already know this.
And
you
he
don't
can
know
walk around, right?
Because he's not in the suit, but also when he's out of the suit, he has these braces on.
Okay.
So he has robotics that help him walk around. But he actually is, for the last few movies, been a paraplegic.
Interesting. So
yeah. Again, more. There's a scene in Endgame, and I said we were going to wrap this up, but I'm just going to point this out to you real quick. So the Nebula character, her backstory is, so you have Nebula and then Gamora, the green woman, and their daughters of Thanos. He would make them fight,
right?
And every time, if one of them lost the fight, he would have a piece of their body surgically removed and a robotic added in its place. Gamora,
so that makes sense.
Gamora always won. She never lost.
And so Nebula
is this like brutalized woman who's literally been deconstructed and built into this monstrous thing. So that was why they paired. When they went back in time, they paired Nebula with War Machine or Rhodey, because they were both people who had been broken and rebuilt in some way.
Gotcha.
So
like the $6 million man and the $6 million woman.
Yeah. So there's a line where Rhodey, War Machine, says, talking to Nebula, says, we're broke. We work with what we have left.
Okay. Yeah.
So
I wouldn't have caught that.
Yeah. So again, a real powerful message for the disabled.
Right.
Right. So, anyways, just. Kudos to Disney.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kudos to Bob Iger, Kevin Feige, and everybody at Disney and Marvel Studios. Yeah. And we didn't talk about it all, but also Kathleen Kennedy at Lucasfilm. What they're doing is, in some sense, it's risky, but it's also a pretty safe bet, as evidenced by the fact that they've made like $20 billion. So
yeah, that's an okay return on investment, I think. So.
Yeah. Anyways, kudos to everybody for what they're doing, and hope to see more in the future.
Yeah, same here. And I'll go see some Marvel movies.
Yeah. Well, you got a Star Wars movie coming up too. So.
Oh, Star Wars.
Yeah. We'll probably have to get you caught up on that. But anyways, thanks for watching this. Thanks for watching this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I love doing this.
And this is kind of where. I want to kind of take this channel is having more of these kind of discussions, because quite frankly, if I have to say whether or not I like Dumbo or Pet Sematary again, I will abandon this completely.
I pray for your soul.
Yeah, I'm done. I'm done watching shitty movies and telling you why I don't like them. I just don't like them, and I don't want to watch them anymore.
Right.
So, but I do love having these kind of discussions. Yeah. So this is kind of where I hope to take the channel. And for all of you that are still watching, hope you stay on board and get on the bandwagon.
Get on the bandwagon.